Red Hawk Valley, 1874. A horse dragged itself toward the fence at first light. Step, drag, step, drag, like it was negotiating with the ground instead of crossing it. The right front leg was wrapped, but not the way anyone in this valley had ever tied a bandage. Tight where no one would think to pull. Loose where the blood ran close to the skin, as if whoever made it understood the leg from the inside. A calloused hand touched the knot, held there a long moment. Then the man looked up north toward the mountains. Far off, where the grass turned from gold to gray, a figure was coming. No horse, no weapon, just footsteps set down, not taken. Like she was reading the ground as she crossed it, she stopped 25 feet from the fence and looked toward the barn. Nobody came here on purpose. That was the first thing Harlan Cross learned when he arrived 6 years ago, with a folded land deed in his coat pocket and a horse that was already tired of him. The valley wasn't on any map worth buying. The soil was mostly rock and dry clay and stubbornness. The creek ran thin in summer and mean in spring. The nearest town, Redfield, was 12 miles of bad road and worse company. Harlan liked it fine. He had 42 years behind him and not much to show for them, except calloused hands, and a tolerance for silence that most men never develop. And his father, Joseph Cross, had left him 2 things: the land deed and a debt that had seemed small until Harlan actually read the numbers. He burned the letter from the bank, kept the deed, spent the first winter in a structure that called itself a house the way a wet dog calls itself a pet. 4 walls. A roof that leaked in 3 places. A fireplace that smoked when the wind came from the north, which was always. He slept in his coat for 2 months and woke up cold every morning and did not to complain because there was no one to complain to, which was its own kind of mercy. He fixed the roof first, then the walls, then the floor. Then he dug the well by hand over 14 days that he did not like to think about. The blisters came on day 2 and split on day 4, and by day 6, his hands were something other than hands. They were instruments, raw and necessary, and he wrapped them at night with strips of an old shirt, and in the morning unwrapped them and went back down. The water, when it came, smelled of deep, cold stone. He stood in the hole with water around his boots, and looked up at the circle of sky above him, and felt something he couldn't name. Not pride, something quieter. Something that had to do with having gone far enough into the ground to find what was waiting. Then the fence posts. Then the small barn. Then the irrigation ditch that took him 2 full years to get right, because water doesn't go where you point it. Water goes where it wants, and you spend 2 years learning to want the same thing. By year 3, the grass came in. By year 4, the cattle were healthy. By year 5, the neighbors who had laughed quietly stopped laughing loudly. By year 6, Harlan Cross had a working ranch. 1 man, no help. 12 miles from anyone who might notice if he didn't come back from checking the north fence. He told himself he liked it fine. Most days he believed it. The evenings were the hardest part. Not the work. The work was never the hard part. Work was simple. Work had a clear beginning and a clear end, and everything in between was just the doing of it. But evenings had no task. Evenings were just a man on a porch with a cooling cup of coffee, watching a valley go from gold to red to dark, and the silence that settled over everything was the silence of a place that held no particular memory of him. He had lived here 6 years, and the land did not yet know his name. He thought that sometimes, whether land learned things, whether it stored the particular weight of the boots that walked it, the particular way a fence post was set, the angle of the irrigation ditch cut into its body. He thought maybe it did. He thought maybe that was what 6 years meant. Not that you owned a place, but that the place had started to hold you. The way wood holds the grain of itself. He told himself that was enough. Most days, he almost believed it. The morning it started, he was fixing that north fence. Same fence he fixed every spring, because the winter ice cracked the wood, and because that was simply the nature of things. You fix, things break, you fix again. There is no end to this. There is only the rhythm of it, which is either comforting or bleak depending on how much coffee you've had. He'd had 1 cup, bleak it was. The sun was barely up. That particular yellow light of early morning in high desert country, thin and honest and not yet warm. Harlan had his sleeves rolled to the elbows. Hammer in his right hand, post in his left. The valley stretched out behind him, still and wide and the color of old straw. He heard the horse before he saw it, 1 set of hooves. Moving wrong, not the clean 4-beat rhythm of a healthy animal. Something broken in the count, step, drag, drag. Like the horse was negotiating with the ground instead of crossing it. Harlan stopped hammering, turned slow. The horse came over the northern ridge at a walk, black and white, a paint broad through the chest. The kind of horse built for mountain terrain, not flatland, head low, the right front leg. Barely touching the ground, barely. Just the toe of the hoof, kissing the dirt, with each step like it was trying to get through without disturbing anything. It wasn't running. It wasn't stopping either. It just kept coming. Harlan set down the hammer, opened his hands, palms out, not because he'd been taught to, because it was simply the right thing to do in the presence of an animal in pain. Something in the gesture that said, "I see you, I'm not a threat. I know you're already fighting enough without me adding to it." The horse registered this. Ears twitched forward, head lifted 2 inches, and kept walking. Closer, closer, until it stopped 10 feet away and stood there breathing, sides heaving, coat dark with dried sweat, eyes half closed, not dead, not dying, just finished. Harlan moved to the right front leg, slow, no sudden gestures. He'd been kicked twice in his life and had no interest in a 3rd time. He crouched low and looked. The leg was wrapped, cloth bandage, dark with old blood at the wound site. But the wrapping itself, the technique of it, stopped him cold. He'd wrapped 100 animal wounds in his life. Loose figure eights, tied at the top, enough pressure to slow bleeding, but not cut circulation. Every man in the valley wrapped a wound more or less the same way. You learned it from whoever taught you ranching, and you did it that way until you died. This was different, tighter in some places, looser in others. The tension varied according to something. Some logic Harlan couldn't immediately name. Like whoever had done this understood the internal structure of the leg, where the blood runs close to the surface, where to press and where to let go. Like they had studied this from the inside rather than the outside. He touched the knot. Firm. Small. Pulled in a direction he wouldn't have thought to pull. Efficient in the way that nothing taught from habit is efficient. Efficient in the way that something understood deeply becomes efficient. The knot of someone who had tied many such knots and had never once tied one the way someone else showed them. He sat back on his heels and looked at that knot for a long moment. Then he looked north toward the mountains. The Tokala Band's territory started maybe 8 miles up. Everyone in Red Hawk Valley knew this. Most people in Red Hawk Valley preferred not to think about it too directly. They talked about the mountains with the vague discomfort of people talking about a neighbor they'd wronged and hoped not to run in and hoped not to run into. Harlan thought about it directly. He stood up, got a lead rope from the fence post, clipped it to the horse's halter, loose, just a suggestion of direction, and started walking toward the barn. The horse followed. Of course it did. It had come this far. Inside the barn he worked carefully, water first. The horse drank with desperate focus, muzzle buried in the bucket, water sloshing over the sides. Harlan watched and waited. You don't treat a wound before you let the animal drink. That's basic. Something in the body loosens when it stops being thirsty. The muscles ease. The panic goes down a degree, makes the rest of it easier for both of you. He unwrapped the legs slowly, layered by layer. The outer cloth, dark brown with old blood. Then a middle layer, lighter, newer. Applied after the first dressing, which meant someone had been maintaining this wound over a period of time. Then something that made him stop. Against the wound itself, packed in like a poultice, was a paste of some kind, green-gray, fibrous. The smell of it was, he didn't have a word for it, not unpleasant, sharp and earthy and medicinal in a way that had nothing to do with anything had bought from the Redfield General Store. More like something alive. More like something that had grown up knowing what it was for. He looked at it a long moment. The wound beneath was ugly. A deep gash along the cannon bone, from a fall, probably, on rough terrain. The kind of wound that gets infected in a day if you leave it alone. In bad cases, the infection moved up the leg. In very bad cases, you lost the animal. But this wound was not infected. Swollen, yes. Hot to the touch, yes. But clean, conspicuously, deliberately clean. Someone had cleaned it and re-cleaned it and packed it with whatever this substance was, and wrapped it with the precise knowledge of someone who had been doing this, keeping this horse alive and moving for days. Harlan cleaned it further with water, and the carbolic he kept in the barn for exactly this kind of thing. Wrapped it himself. His wrapping was not as elegant as the previous one, and he was aware of this in a way he didn't find comfortable. He added a layer of padding that the original dressing hadn't needed, because the original dresser hadn't left space for slippage. He had. That was the difference. He put the horse in the empty stall with fresh hay and clean water. Then he noticed the saddlebag, or what was left of one. A single leather pouch, tied to what remained of a makeshift saddle, mostly a blanket and some rawhide, on the horse's back. He hadn't seen it at first. Brown on brown, tucked tight against the horse's side. He opened it inside. A small bag of dried plant material. 3 different kinds, separated, tied with thin leather cord. He opened each one and smelled it. Nothing he recognized. But someone had packed these deliberately, specifically, had looked at this wound and known what it needed, and prepared it in advance for a journey, which meant whoever treated this horse had planned for the horse to keep moving. Keep moving to somewhere. Keep moving to here. Harlan set the bags on the workbench, stood in the middle of the barn. The horse was already eating, which was a good sign for the horse, for Harlan. It was the beginning of a question he didn't know how to finish. He stood there a while longer than he needed to, looking at the horse, looking at the bags, looking at the knot he'd untied and set aside, because he couldn't bring himself to throw it away. Then he went inside and made more coffee. That night he didn't sleep much, not because he was afraid. He'd spent enough years in this valley to know the difference between a threat and a mystery. A threat had a shape to it, a direction, something you could position yourself against. A mystery was different. A mystery was a door left open somewhere in the house. Not dangerous, just present, just there. He made coffee before first light and sat on the porch with his hands around the cup and watched the valley come on back from dark. It came back slowly. Always did. First the shapes, the ridge to the north, the line of cottonwoods, along the creek, the barn as a darker dark against the dark. Then the sky behind the eastern mountains, lightened by degrees, purple to gray, to a particular thin blue that only existed in the hour before sunrise. Then the land took color, pale gold on the grass, silver on the creek. The mountains to the north were the last things to emerge from the dark. Big shapes, old shapes, the kind that made everything below them feel temporary, not in a frightening way, just in the way of being reminded that you are a small thing in a large place. And that is simply a fact, not a verdict. He thought about the knot. That specific, economical, thoughtful knot. He'd been a rancher for 12 years before he came here, working other men's land, learning what there was to learn, and he had never seen a bandage tied that way, which meant whoever tied it hadn't learned from any rancher. They'd learned from something else, from watching maybe, from necessity, from a tradition of healing that went back much further than anything in Redfield's memory. The sun came up. He drank his coffee, and then he saw her. She came from the direction of the creek, which meant she'd come from the north and cut east along the water and come in through the willow break where the bank was low. a route that would have kept her out of sight from the main valley until she was already close. Not a route someone stumbled onto. A route someone had chosen after looking at this land from somewhere above it and thinking about sight lines. She was walking, no horse, no weapon that he could see, no rifle, no bow. She moved at the pace of someone who had time and knew it, not slow from exhaustion or laziness, slow from purpose, like each step was placed rather than taken, like she was reading the ground as she crossed it. She stopped 25 feet from the fence, stood there, looked at the barn. Harlan was on the porch, coffee cup in hand. He didn't stand up, didn't reach for anything. He looked at her the same way he'd looked at the paint horse the morning before, with his whole attention and no urgency, because urgency in that moment would have been wrong. Urgency would have been about him, not about what was actually happening. She was young, 20-something. Dark hair loose over her shoulders, moving slightly in the morning wind. Apache, the style of her clothing, the beadwork on the strap across her chest. Her posture was not the posture of someone who felt they were trespassing. She stood in his yard the way she might stand anywhere, like she had the same right to be here that the creek had to run through, which was interesting. He watched her assess the barn, the corral, the house, him. She did it the way you read something you've been thinking about for a while. Quickly in some places, slowly in others, noting what confirmed expectations and what didn't. Harlan spoke first, because silence has to end somewhere, and he figured it should be him. "Horse is in the barn," he said. Just that. No inflection, no question. Right front leg is wrapped. "He's eating." She didn't respond. Looked at the barn, then at him. Then back at the barn. He gestured toward the barn door with his coffee cup. She walked past the fence, just walked through the gap he'd left open from yesterday, which he realized now he'd left open, without thinking about it, and went to the barn door and went inside. Harlan stayed on the porch. This was deliberate. She didn't need him in there. The horse knew her and didn't know him, which meant her presence was the calming element, and his would be the disruption. Basic animal logic. He understood this because he'd spent a long time around animals, and animals had taught him things about what presence means and what it costs. He finished his coffee. From inside the barn he could hear, not words, just the low, even cadence of a voice. The horse's breathing, which changed, became slower, more even, the particular sound of an animal settling its weight back on its haunches, which means it trusts where it is. 15 minutes, maybe 20. She came out, walked to the porch steps. Not onto the porch, stayed at the bottom of the steps. Looked at him directly. Her eyes were dark and still, the kind of eyes that had decided a long time ago not to give anything away for free, not cold, just careful. The eyes of someone who had learned that what you reveal gets used, and had learned it early enough that it had become permanent. She looked at him the way you look at a piece of work someone has done, checking it for quality, for whether it'll hold. She held out something, a small bundle. Dried plants tied with a leather cord. Different plants from the ones in the saddlebag. Different stage of treatment. He reached down and took it. Their hands didn't touch. She turned and walked back toward the willow brake. He watched her go until the willows closed around her, and the morning continued as though she had never been there. Then he looked down at the bundle, in his hand, brought it to his nose. Sharp, green. Something underneath that was almost sweet, like late summer grass after rain. He had no idea what any of it was or what to do with it, but he knew this. She'd brought medicine for the horse, specifically for this stage of the healing, which meant she knew what stage the wound was at, which meant she'd been watching the barn since she got here, watching and waiting to see how he handled it. He sat with that for a while. Then he went back inside and made more coffee. She came back the next day and the day after, not at the same time, not with any pattern he could predict, sometimes mid-morning. Once at dusk, which surprised him, the light going orange over the ridge, and her walking through it, like she'd simply materialized out of the color. Always from the direction of the creek. Always on foot. By the third visit, Harlan had put a tin cup of water on the fence post nearest the barn door. He didn't say anything about it, didn't point at it, just left it there before she arrived. Filled from the well, clean. She picked it up on the way in, drank it standing at the fence post, one hand on the wood, set the cup back. Went to the barn. On her way out, she left something on the fence post. Different each time. Dried leaves. A twist of sinew, once, and this one he kept specifically. He kept it on the workbench and looked at it several evenings running. A small piece of braided rawhide, no bigger than his thumbnail, tied in a pattern he couldn't figure out. He tried to figure it out 3 separate evenings, turning it in the lamplight, following the weave of it with his fingertip, couldn't. Kept it anyway. The horse improved. Steadily, the way real healing works. Not dramatically, not in a day, but with the patient progress of a body, doing what bodies are designed to do when given what they need. The swelling went down. The wound closed at the edges first, then deeper. The horse began putting weight on the leg. A little, then more, then with a confidence that came from somewhere internal, from the horse deciding to trust the leg again. Harlan started to understand that the herbs she brought were not supplementary. They were central. He was maintaining. She was actually healing. There was a difference between those two things, and it was significant. He adjusted his approach accordingly. This was not a comfortable adjustment. He had spent 6 years being the person who knew what to do on this land. 6 years of self-reliance so complete that accepting help from another person had become almost physically difficult, like a joint that had fused in one position and protested any other. But he watched what she did with the poultice, the compression schedule, the specific way she moved the horse's leg through its range of motion each visit, not roughly, not clinically, but with a particular attentiveness, feeling for the place where resistance became pain, stopping just before that place. And he thought, she's right, and I would not have done it this way. And the horse would have taken longer, and maybe not healed as fully. So he watched, and he adjusted. And he did not pretend he had known all along. On the 6th day, she spoke to him directly. He was in the barn working on the irrigation valve, a small piece of machinery that controlled water flow from the well to the east field. It had been sticking for a week. He'd taken it apart twice. He was currently taking it apart a 3rd time, which is the point at which a man stops being patient and starts having a conversation with inanimate objects about their fundamental character. He heard her come in, didn't look up. "Horse is doing better," he said, to the valve, to the barn, to whoever was listening. "Putting weight on it more today." She came to stand beside him, looked at the valve and the collection of small iron parts arranged on the workbench in the order he'd removed them. She looked at the arrangement carefully, the way she looked at everything. "What is this?" she said. Her English was clear, accented in a specific way, not heavy, just present. Like English was a room she moved through comfortably, but it was not the room she lived in. The room she lived in was somewhere else, and you could hear it underneath the English, the cadence of another language, shaping the pauses between words. "Controls the water," he said. "Flow from the well to the east field. Supposed to, anyway. Currently it's controlling my patience, which is running low." She looked at the parts, picked up the central pin, turned it over, looked at the threads carefully, rotating it in her fingers, checking it from different angles. "This is wrong," she said. He looked up. She held the pin out to him. "This thread's wrong direction. You put it in, it loosens when the water pushes against it. Should tighten." He took it, looked at the threads. She was right. He had been putting it together wrong for a week. 3 separate disassemblies, and he had not noticed because he was always putting it back together the same wrong way. He'd learned the wrong way, so thoroughly it had become invisible. "Huh," he said. That was all he said. She put the pin down and went to check on the horse. He fixed the valve in 10 minutes, with the pin threaded correctly, and the water moved through it the way it was supposed to. Clean and even, and without the grinding stiffness that had been making him increasingly unreasonable, and he stood there, listening to the sound of properly flowing water, and thought, 6 days she's been coming here, 6 days of watching me work. And the one thing she said something about was the one thing I was doing wrong. Not randomly, not to show off, not to establish anything, just because it was there and it was wrong, and saying, so was the useful thing. He found that more interesting than he had expected to. Days passed. The valley turned. Mornings got sharper. The light on the mountains changed, earlier in the day now, cutting across the rock face, at angles that revealed things the summer light had flattened. The creek ran cold. The grass went from green to gold at the edges. They developed a rhythm, not a schedule, not an agreement, just a way of being in the same space that had sorted itself out without discussion. The way water finds its level, without being told to. He would be doing something. She would arrive. She would see what he was doing and either watch, assist, or go directly to the horse. He would not stop what he was doing to explain himself. She did not expect explanation. She would observe until she understood, and then either participate or not, according to whatever internal assessment she'd made. He found this restful in a way he hadn't anticipated. Most people filled silence with talking. Most people, when they didn't understand something, asked immediately rather than watching first. She watched first, always, as though understanding needed to be earned through observation before it could be claimed through language. Occasionally she told him things about plants. 3 different kinds growing along the creek bank that he had been walking past for 6 years without seeing. She showed him each one. How to tell them apart. What each was for. This one, she said, pointing to a low-growing plant with small gray-green leaves. Fever. Animal or person. Small amount in water. Too much, she made a dismissive gesture. Something between a wave and a shrug. Makes it worse. Much worse. How much is too much? She looked at him. More than a little. Well, he almost smiled. That's a precise measurement. That's how much is too much, she said, entirely unapologetically, and moved to the next plant. He paid attention. He had a good memory for practical information, the kind that had actual consequences for ignoring it. And information about what grew on his own land was, he was coming to understand, more useful than he'd previously thought. He had spent 6 years focused on the grass and the water and the cattle, and had effectively ignored everything else, which now struck him as a significant oversight. She knew this land, not his ranch, the land his ranch sat on, the creek and the soil chemistry and what grew where and why, not randomly but according to patterns, water tables and sun exposure, and the particular memory soil has of everything that has ever grown in it. She walked the creek bank the way he walked his fence lines, with proprietary knowledge, with the ease of someone for whom this information is not learned, but simply known. And he had been living here 6 years, and she knew his land better than he did. He could have felt defensive about this. He chose not to. In return, not as payment, just as the natural exchange of 2 people working alongside each other. He showed her things. The pulley system in the hayloft. The principle of mechanical advantage. She watched with the focused attention she brought to everything. And then she tried it herself, lifting a 50-pound grain walm sack with 2 fingers worth of effort, and stood there, holding the rope with something on her face that wasn't quite surprise. More like a fact being confirmed that she'd suspected but not verified. She looked at her own hand holding the rope. The weight is still there, she said. Still there, he confirmed. Just spread out differently. She was quiet for a moment, looking at her hand, looking at the rope, looking at the sack hanging in midair. Like carrying pain with another person, she said. The weight doesn't go away. But where it lands changes. He had no answer for that. Some things don't need answering. They need the space after them to be quiet, so they can settle into whatever place they were meant to settle. She let the rope down slowly, watched the sack descend, set the rope on its hook, and walked to the horse. And Harlan Cross stood next to that pulley for a moment longer than he needed to, listening to the grain sack settle, thinking about what she'd said, and about the specific truth of it, and about the fact that he had understood it immediately, which told him something about himself that he filed away without examining too directly. Then he learned her name, 7th day, maybe 8th. He had stopped counting exactly, which was itself something he noticed. He was a man who counted things, who kept track, who knew precisely how many fence posts ran the east line, and how many gallons the well produced per day. Losing count was not like him. She had arrived mid-morning and gone directly to the horse and was redressing the wound with the focused efficiencies he'd stopped trying to interrupt. He was mending a bridle at the workbench, quiet in the barn. Sun coming through the gap in the door, that specific stripe of gold that shifted across the floor through the afternoon, marking the time passing the way a sundial marks it. She said something he didn't catch. He looked up. She had one hand on the horse's nose, not gripping, just resting, the way you rest a hand on something you've been taking care of for a long time. Looking at him, "Ona," she said, and touched her chest with 2 fingers. Simple, direct. The way you say a thing you've decided to say, he understood. He set down the bridle, touched his own chest. "Harlan," she repeated it, quietly. "Harlan." Like she was testing the weight of it, rolling it against her tongue to see how it sat, deciding whether it would hold. Then she went back to the wound. He went back to the bridle. But something had shifted. The air in the barn had a different quality, not warmer or lighter, nothing that dramatic, just different. 2 people who had been sharing a space for over a week had finally shared names, and that was a small thing that turned out not to be small. Names were a different kind of presence than bodies. A body in a space was just a body. A name was a choice. He thought about the name, Ona. He didn't know what it meant. He thought he would not ask, because asking would have felt like he was trying to get more than she'd offered, and she'd offered exactly what she intended to offer. He worked on the bridle. She finished with the horse. She left without saying anything else, which was exactly right. The trouble started quietly, as trouble always does. Cobb Yarrow came by on a Thursday. Cobb was 60 years old and looked 70 and moved like 50, which was exactly how he wanted it. He had run a trading post between Redfield and the mountain roads for 30 years and knew 3 things with any reliability: the price of goods, the direction of gossip, and which way the wind was blowing before anyone else felt it move. He sat in Harlan's kitchen and drank coffee and made the face he always made at Harlan's coffee, which was the face of a man performing suffering for an audience of 1. "I hear you have company these days," he said. "Most things you hear are true," Harlan said. Cobb set his cup down. This was the signal that the casual portion of the visit was over. "Girl's name is Ona. Tokala's daughter." He paused. "You know who Tokala is?" "I know. Everyone in the valley knew Tokala. You knew him the way you knew the mountains. Not necessarily up close, but as a constant feature of the landscape that shaped everything around it. The Tokala band had been in these mountains since before there was a Redfield to put on a map. Before there was a map. Their territory started 8 miles north and ran up into terrain that got harder and colder, and more serious the higher you went. Terrain that had shaped the people who lived on it the same way terrain always shapes people. Slowly and completely. Tokala himself. Harlan had heard different versions from different people, which was how he knew to trust none of them entirely. What he had assembled, from the careful sorting of consistent details across inconsistent sources, was this: a man in his mid-50s who had watched his people lose ground steadily for 20 years and had managed somehow to keep his judgment about when to fight and when to wait. That was rare. That was In Harlan's experience, actually rare. Most men facing that kind of sustained pressure either broke early or too late. Tokala appeared to have found a third option. Her mother was the healer, Cobb said. Passed 2 years back. Ona took it over. She's young for it, but apparently she'd been learning since she was a child. From what I understand, there wasn't anyone else. Harlan looked at his coffee. She's their only healer, now, Cobb continued. Which means she's not exactly someone the band can spare. And she's been leaving their territory. He paused here for emphasis. The pause of a man who knows the weight of what he's about to say. Regularly. For over a week. Which I'm told is something she has never done before. Not once. Not for anything. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, a bird. The wind moving through the fence posts. The particular creak of a house, settling in the morning warmth. I'm not telling you what to do, Cobb said. Good, I'm telling you what's true. Silas Grund was in Redfield 3 days ago. He saw her crossing the South Road on her way here. Another pause. Silas Grund notices everything that might eventually be of use to him. Harlan put his cup down. Silas Grund owned the largest adjacent property, 4,000 acres to Harlan's 800, with the appetite of a man who considered 4,000 a reasonable place to start. He had not caused Harlan direct trouble in 6 years. He had simply been present, the way a very large stone in a creek is present. Not actively doing anything, but shaping everything around it. Harlan had learned to set his fence lines and water rights with Grund in mind, the way a man walks, with the knowledge of where the drop-off is. She's treating a horse, Harlan said. I know that. Cobb stood up, unhurriedly, the way a man stands when he said what he came to say, and is satisfied with the saying of it. What I'm telling you is that Grund doesn't care about the horse. And the people Grund talks to won't care. And what people who don't care believe becomes what they believe regardless of the actual facts. He picked up his hat. That's all I'm saying. He left. Harlan sat at the table for a while after. The coffee went cold. He thought about what Cobb had said. Not anxiously. He was not by nature an anxious man, but carefully. The way you think about a fence line that has been fine for years, but might need moving before the ground shifts enough to make the problem structural. He went out to the barn. The horse was standing, full weight on all 4 legs for the first time since it arrived. Not prancing, not performing, just standing like it had a right to, which it did. Harlan watched it for a long moment. Then he went back to the north fence to finish the work he'd started before any of this had happened. The posts needed to be right. The wire needed to be right. The basics of a place needed tending regardless of whatever else was happening around them. He worked until the light went thin. And when the light was gone, he went inside. And the house was exactly as quiet as it always was, which tonight felt like a different kind of quiet than it had for a week. She was there the next morning, earlier than usual. The light was still low and pink when she came through the willow break. The dew thick on the grass, the air having that particular cold clarity autumn mornings before the sun has done anything about it. Harlan was already at the east fence, the long run of it that edged against the creek pasture, because that section had been sitting in his mind as undone, and he didn't like things sitting in his mind as undone. He heard her cross the yard, the barn door. Then silence, which meant the horse was calm. 20 minutes later, she came to where he was working. She stopped at the corner post and looked at the fence line. Then at him. Then at the fence again, with the methodical attention she brought to anything that had been built or grown by human hands. The posts here, she said, gestured along the run. Last 3. They're straight up and down. He looked. They were straight. That was how you put in a fence post. Should angle into the prevailing wind, she said. Just a few degrees. 4, 5. The flat surface of a straight post catches the wind full. Pulls it loose over time. Angled. The pressure goes down into the ground instead of sideways against the wood. He looked at his straight posts. He thought about the irrigation valve pin. "You've been watching fence posts," he said. "I watch everything," she said. This was not a boast, just fact. The statement of someone who had learned that watching carefully was a skill worth developing, and had developed it. He straightened up, hands on his hips. She was right. He could see it now that she'd named it. Straight took the full force of the wind broadside. Angled, the geometry changed. The force vector shifted. The pressure went down, rather, then sideways. It would hold longer. It would hold much longer. "Show me," he said. She showed him. They spent the next 2 hours pulling the last 3 posts and resetting them. She held while he tamped. He held while she checked the angle with a method involving a small stone on a piece of cord. A plumb line. Essentially, but simpler, lighter, more portable than any carpenter's tool. More accurate than his eye. They worked without much talking. But it was a different kind of without talking than the first days had been. The first days, the silence was the absence of language. Two people who didn't yet have a shared vocabulary for anything except the horse. This silence was the presence of understanding. The kind of quiet that exists between two people who have found, without negotiating it, a way to work together. The kind that doesn't need to be narrated because it's its own narration. At the third post, their hands were both on the post at the same time, checking the set of it, her left hand, his right, both wrapped around the same cedar post from opposite sides. Neither of them moved, just awareness. Both hands on wood, the morning around them. The sound of the creek 20 yards away, and the wind through the cottonwoods, and somewhere far off a hawk, making that high. Thin cry that sounds like something being torn open in the best possible way. Harlan moved his hand first. "That'll hold," he said. She tested the post herself. Two-handed, leaned her weight against it. Applied force at the angle the wind would apply it. "Now it'll hold," she said. He almost said something. "Stopahomsef. She was right, and the distinction she'd drawn was real, and he didn't need to add anything to it. She picked up her cord and stone, and walked back toward the barn to check the horse before she left for the day. Harlan stood at the fence post for a moment, put his hand on the post where her hand had been. Still warm from the morning sun, or from her. He honestly couldn't tell which. 2 days later, the fence was cut. Harlan was up at first light. The cattle in the east pasture had been restless the night before. That particular sound coming through his sleep that pulls a rancher to his feet before he's fully conscious. That specific unease that means something is wrong. In the dark, nothing wrong with the cattle. What he found was the fence, east fence, the long section, a 60-foot run of it, cut, not broken, not storm damage. Cut with wire cutters, every fourth post, the wire snipped at the base where it was anchored. Clean cuts. The cuts of someone who had taken their time. He stood and looked at the clean cuts and didn't say anything, because there was no one there to say anything to. He thought about who in this valley owned wire cutters that left that specific profile. He thought about what Cobb had said. He thought about Silas Grund standing outside the land office watching him, without any particular expression. He found the second gap he'd missed on the first pass. 2 gaps, 60 feet apart, positioned to funnel cattle toward the creek where the bank was unstable. Deliberate positioning. This was not random. It took him 3 hours to repair. He worked without stopping, without the internal monologue of resentment or anger that might have been understandable, because resentment and anger burned through clarity, and clarity was what the fence needed from him right now. He was halfway through when he heard her. She came from the creek as usual. Stopped at the east fence line. Read it immediately, the cuts, the gaps, the prints in the soil around the posts. She came to where he was working, looked at the cut wire in his hand, looked at the ground near the base of the post for a long moment. "Not Apache," she said. Flat, certain. The tone of someone ruling something out now completely. "No," he agreed, "boots." She pointed to a partial impression in the soft soil near the post. Hard heel, metal toe cap. "Someone who buys their boots in a city." He nodded. He'd seen the same impression. She didn't ask who. She clearly had thoughts about who. But she didn't ask, and he didn't offer. And that was its own kind of agreement, an acknowledgement that both of them already knew, and that saying it out loud added nothing. She picked up the section of wire he had waiting, and held the end while he worked the pliers. They fell into the rhythm of the repair, the way they fell into everything. Without discussion, without assigning roles. Just two people looking at a problem and dividing it along the natural lines of who was where and what needed doing. They worked until early afternoon. When the last section was outspasted, she walked the whole line, post by post. Tested each one, particularly the ones he'd re-angled at her suggestion, which held better than the old straight ones under the same pressure. She came back to where he was coiling the remaining wire. "Hold," she said. "For now," he said, "because it would need checking again." Everything needed checking again. She looked at him. The sun was past its peak, the light from the southwest now, long and angled, the kind of light that made everything in the valley look both more real and more fragile at the same time. "Why do you stay here?" she said. When people make things difficult, he thought about it. Not the performing of thinking. The actual thing, "I built it," he said finally. "The water goes where I put it. The fence is where I set it. The cattle are healthy because of six years of specific decision about grass and water and shelter and the particular needs of this land." He looked at the fence line. "If I leave, I take none of that with me. If I stay, it's mine. Every broken part of it included." She was quiet for a moment. "My mother said." She said slowly, "That land knows who belongs to it, and it makes staying easy for the right ones. Your mother was from here?" "Born 2 miles from where we're standing." He absorbed that. She picked up her bag, adjusted the strap, looked at him once more with something in her face. Not a question, not a statement, something in between. The particular expression of someone who has learned something and is deciding what to do with it. Then she walked toward the creek. Harlan watched her go. He'd been watching her go for 8 days now, and each time it happened the same way. The specific, unwilling attention of a man who has gotten used to someone's presence without realizing it was happening. The valley was quiet around him, but it was a different quiet than before. It had shape now. It had the outline of someone who had been here and wasn't anymore. And that absence was a different thing than the absence that had been here for 6 years. He stood there a minute, just stood there in the long afternoon light. Then he picked up his tools and walked back to the house. The cup on the fence post was empty. He hadn't seen her drink from it today, but she had. The gossip reached Redfield before Harlan did. That was how it worked in small places. The information moved faster than the people. By the time Harlan rode into town for supplies on a Tuesday morning, flour, coffee, salt, wire, a new file for the axe, 3 separate men had already found reasons to look at him a little too long and then look away. He noticed he bought his supplies and did not ask anyone what they were thinking, because he already knew, roughly, and because asking would have made it a conversation, and making it a conversation would have given it a weight it didn't deserve yet. Silas Grund was standing outside the land office when Harlan came out of the general store, not waiting for him, just standing there, the way a man stands outside a building when he wants you to think he happened to be there. Grund was 55, silver-haired and clean-shaven in the middle of the week. The kind of man who wore clean clothes as a form of argument, a statement about who did the dirty work and who oversaw it. He nodded at Harlan the way you nod at a neighbor whose fence line you've been thinking about. "What?" "Cross," he said. Grund. That was all. Harlan tied his supplies to the horse and rode out. But he felt Grund's eyes on his back until he hit the bend in the road, and the town disappeared behind the cottonwoods. He felt them with the physical clarity you feel when someone is looking at you, the way a man looks at something he's decided he eventually wants. She came the next morning. Same route, same unhurried pace. Harlan was at the well, checking the casing, the rope, the pulley, the mechanical systems that kept the water coming up. Things he checked regularly, because the cost of not checking was always greater than the cost of checking. She went to the barn. He finished the well check. Walked to the barn when it made sense to walk to the barn. Not because she was there. Except she was there, and he was going, and he was clear-eyed enough about himself to know those two facts were not entirely unrelated. The horse stood in the shaft of morning light from the high window. Ona had its right foreleg in both hands, moving it slowly through range of motion. Flex, extend, flex, watching the horse's face for the indicators of pain that only someone who knew what to look for would catch. Harlan leaned on the stall door. "Better?" he asked. Nearly, she set the leg down. Let the horse stand on its own. It did. Squarely. Full weight, no compensating shift. Another week. Then he can travel. Harlan looked at the horse. The horse looked at Harlan, with the mild, assessing expression horses have when they've decided they don't need to be afraid of something. "He has a name?" he asked. "Sigan." She didn't look up from the leg. "It means fast." Harlan looked at the horse, which had limped onto his property at the pace of a man walking through deep mud. "Optimistic name," he said. Something happened at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile. The ghost of one. The smallest possible indication that the word optimistic had landed somewhere that found it apt. "He was fast," she said. "Before, he'll be fast again." She looked at him then. Something in that look. "Yes," she said. "He will." He watched her work, and then he said, because it needed saying, and he didn't know a better way, "There's talk in Redfield about you coming here." Her hands didn't stop. "I know. Grund is paying attention to it. Grund pays attention to everything he might eventually want." She looked up. "Direct. Do you want me to stop coming?" The barn was quiet. Outside, a dove in the rafters that had decided the barn was its personal concern, the wind. A horse somewhere in the distance? No. Harlan said. She went back to the leg. Then, she said, "That is the answer." 2 days later, Cobb came back. This time he didn't bother with the coffee ceremony. Sat down at the table and looked at Harlan with the expression of a man who is delivering information he didn't particularly want to have to deliver. "Reed came through Redfield yesterday," Cobb said. Reed. Harlan knew the name, hadn't met the man. Ona had acknowledged it once. Not mentioned, more like acknowledged. The way you acknowledge something you've walked around enough times that you know exactly where it is without looking. "He's Apache," Cobb said. 28. Good standing in the band. "He asked Tokala for Ona last year." Pause. She said, "No, that's her right." "Yes, it is." Cobb turned his hat in his hands, a habit he had when he was thinking through something he'd already thought through. But Reed didn't come to Redfield to buy supplies. He came to ask questions. About this ranch. About you specifically. About what kind of man lives alone here for 6 years. Harlan looked at the table. "What kind of man does he think lives here?" he said. Flat. "I don't think he's decided yet," Cobb said, "which is better than the alternative. But I thought you should know. There are now people asking about you from 2 different directions, and both directions have moved closer in the last 2 weeks." He left Harlan, sat at the table, 2 directions. Grund from the south, with legal patience and money, and the particular kind of ambition that finds any gap useful and any weakness exploitable. Reed from the north, with loss and pride, and the specific wound of rejection, which, in his experience, was the most unpredictable fuel, because it didn't follow the logic of interest or strategy. It followed the logic of what a man could not let go of. He was in the middle, which was fine. He'd built a ranch in the middle of a valley no one else wanted. The middle was familiar territory. He told himself that. She was at the barn before dawn the following morning. Harlan hadn't even made coffee yet. The sky was gray-pink at the edges, and the dew was so thick the grass looked silver. He found her sitting outside the barn door with her back against the wall, and her knees drawn up and her eyes closed. He stopped. She wasn't asleep. The way she wasn't asleep was obvious. A particular quality of stillness that was active, not passive. She was doing something internally that required no movement. He had no word for what it was. It looked like listening. He went back inside, made coffee, brought 2 cups out, set one next to her without a word, and sat down on the other side of the barn door with his own cup. She opened her eyes, looked at the cup, looked at him, picked up the cup and drank. They sat like that for a while. The valley came into its color slowly, the way it always did, the gray lightning, the gold appearing first, on the highest ground and working down, the mountains releasing their shapes from the dark. Reed came to Redfield, Harlan said. I know, he's asking about me. I know that too. She drank. He does this. Tries to understand the obstacle before he decides what to do about it. Obstacle. Harlan filed that word carefully. Is that what I am? She looked at him with the level, assessing gaze she turned on everything. The same gaze she used on fence posts and horse legs and irrigation valves. Measuring the true state of things. I don't know what you are, she said. That's why I keep coming back. Which was either reassuring or the opposite. He genuinely couldn't tell. She talked about Reed later that day, in the east pasture where she was showing him wild yarrow. Not because he asked. He specifically did not ask. He had made a private rule about not pushing her toward things she hadn't chosen to offer, and he was mostly keeping it. He spoke first, she said without preamble, crouching beside a yarrow plant and touching a leaf. He waited before I had said 10 words. He told me about his horses, 3 of them, good horses. Then about his standing in the band, his hunting record, what kind of camp he could provide. She touched the leaf again. I asked him one question. I asked what he thought I was good at. Besides healing, a pause. He said he had heard I was good at healing. The field was quiet. That was his answer. She said Harlan looked at the yarrow, at the 2 impressions they'd made in the soft soil where they'd crouched, side by side. He heard about you, he said. He didn't see you. She looked up. Something shifted in her face. A small, careful opening. The second one, she said, watched me work all day. Told me at the end that I was very capable. For a woman, she stood. The third one got angry when I said no. That's the one to watch, Harlan said. Yes, she said. That's Reed. A silence then. I'm not going to tell you what to do, she said. About any of this, I know. But I want you to know. I wasn't looking for anything when Saigon came to your fence line. I came for the horse. I know that, and I kept coming back because she stopped. Started again. Looked at the mountains to the north. Because this is the first place where I have thought out loud and not been told I was wrong before I finished thinking. Harlan said nothing. Which was, he understood, exactly the right response. Proof of the thing she'd just said. The paper arrived on a Friday. A man Harlan didn't recognize rode up the main road. Young, city clothes. Boots that had never been near actual field work, and handed him an envelope with the careful politeness of someone who knew what was inside it and was relieved to be only the delivery mechanism. Harlan opened it at the kitchen table. Write it twice. The paper was from a law firm in Denver representing Silas Grund. It referenced a debt note. Original amount $340, held against the estate of one Joseph Cross. Deceased, executed in 1868 with the First Territorial Bank of Redfield. The note had not been discharged at the time of the bank's insolvency in 1869. With 5 years of accumulated interest, the amount now stood at $510. Payment within 30 days. Or proceedings to recover the collateral. The collateral was the land. All 800 acres. The water rights, the barn, the house. The fences he'd set wrong and then set right. The irrigation ditch that had taken 2 years of learning. The well he'd dug by hand over 14 days. All of it. 30 days, Harlan folded the paper and put it back in the envelope. He sat at the table for a long time. Not from devastation, from the need to think clearly, and clear thinking required sitting still until the first wave of reaction passed. His father, Joseph Cross, a man of sporadic good intentions and consistent poor management, who had borrowed against this land before it was worth anything and died before the bank failed, which meant he never had to see what that debt became in other men's hands. $510. Hers. He had roughly 60 in cash. He thought about Cobb, about Ellison Harp. Technically still a lawyer, who he knew through Cobb, who spent most of his time fishing these days. About whether there was anything legal to be done on. About what it would take to fight a Denver law firm with $60 and a mortgage on land that was all he had. He sat there until the light changed. Then he put the envelope in the drawer and went to feed the cattle. Because they needed feeding regardless, she arrived the next morning and knew something was wrong before he said a word. This was something she did. Walked in and read a place the way other people read a page. She looked at him once. Looked at the house. Something in her face registered what she'd read, and she said nothing about it. They worked through the morning. At noon at the well. Grund found a debt my father left. Says it belongs to me. Does it? Legally? Maybe. The bank that held it failed. The records are complicated. Will you lose the land? Direct. No softening. Not if I can find something to fight it with. But I need time and someone who knows the law. And Grund already has lawyers. She was quiet, looking at the land around them. The pasture, the ditch, the barn with the new section of roof. My father, she said. He has watched this ranch for 6 years. Harlan looked at her. He knows things, she said carefully. About this land, about who was here before. About what happened. She met his eyes. I can't speak for him, but he knows things. I'm not asking you to speak for him. Good. Because he'll come when he's ready. Not before. She left late that afternoon. Later than usual. She paused at the barn door. If the temperature drops fast tonight, she said, Sigyn will be restless. He doesn't like cold on a healing leg. I'll check on him, Harlan said. She looked at the barn, at the sky. The particular look of someone calculating. I may come back later, she said. To check myself, he nodded. Didn't make anything of it. She left. He checked the horse twice. The temperature dropped fast. He didn't hear her come back. But in the morning there was a second blanket folded over the stall door. That hadn't been there the night before. He left it there. Tokala came on a Wednesday. Harlan was fixing the barn door hinge, a simple job he'd been putting off for 2 weeks, and that had finally reached the point where it could not be put off any further, when he heard horses on the main road. Multiple. From the north, 4 riders. Tokala in front. 3 behind, still, watchful, not aggressive. The posture of men accompanying someone, not surrounding someone. Tokala was exactly what Harlan had expected and not quite. 56 or 57. A face that had been through weather of every kind and had emerged not diminished but concentrated. The way wood concentrates when it dries, becoming harder and more itself. Nothing extra on it. Everything present was there on purpose. He rode to the fence and stopped. Harlan opened the gate. Gestured toward the house. They sat at the kitchen table. Tokala looked around the kitchen. Not at the things in it, at the evidence of the person who lived in it. Clean, spare. The marks of someone who lived alone but took it seriously. He drank the coffee without reacting to it. Harlan respected this. You know why I'm here, Tokala said. Yes, then you know my question. You want to know what I want from your daughter, plainly. Because with a man like this, plainly was the only language that didn't insult both parties. I don't want anything from her that she doesn't want to give me. Tokala set down the cup. That's a careful answer. It's a true one. Careful and true are not always the same thing. No, Harlan said. But this time they are. Tokala looked at the table. At the worn surface of 6 years of solitary meals, she refused 3 men, he said. Good men by the standards of my people, she told me. Something shifted slightly in Tokala's face. That Harlan said it without hedging. That he knew and was saying so without making it into something. And you don't think this is unusual, Tokala said. A woman who refuses 3 good men and then comes repeatedly to the ranch of a man she didn't know. I think she found something here she wasn't finding there. I don't know exactly what. I haven't asked. Why not? Because she'll tell me when she wants me to know. And I'd rather wait for what's true than push for something that's just an answer. Tokala was quiet for a long time. Outside, the horses moved. The wind in the door frame. You are poor, Tokala said, by some measures. I have water that runs clean, cattle that are healthy, a house that won't fall in the first winter wind. I was poorer when I came here. I'll be more comfortable in 6 more years if I'm left to work it. A pause. And I have 6 years of not having lied to keep anything. What do you offer her? Harlan thought. Actually thought, not performing the thinking. A place where she doesn't have to be smaller than she is, he said. Clean water, solid roof, honest work. A man who knows when to be quiet and listen. He paused. That's not nothing, the kitchen held that. Then Tokala stood. At the door, he stopped. Looked at Sigan in the corral, moving easily now, the limp nearly gone. You've taken good care of the horse, Tokala said. She started it. Tokala looked at him. Don't forget that, he walked out. Mounted. The 4 riders moved back north. Harlan stood on the porch until the dust settled. Then he went inside and picked up Tokala's cup and looked at it for a moment and set it in the basin and started thinking about Ellison Harp. He found Ellison Harp where Cobb said he'd be, behind the land office in what had been a storage room and was now an unofficial consultancy. Papers stacked on every flat surface, pipe tobacco having taken up permanent residence in the air. Harp was 70. He moved like a man who had decided that moving fast was optional. He read the letter. Read it again. Turned it over. Your father paid? He said. I believe so, but the bank failed before they recorded it. That's what I think happened. Harp tapped the paper. When a territorial bank fails, outstanding debt instruments go into legal suspensions unless they're certified by the district court before insolvency is finalized. This one has no certification mark. It should have been voided, should have been, Harlan said. Grun's lawyers will argue the absence of certification doesn't void the underlying debt. They're not wrong, that argument exists. He looked at Harlan. But I can argue the other side. The question is what you can prove about the payment. Witnesses? Yes. Who would remember a transaction from 1868 or 1869? Harp picked up his pipe. Augustus fell. Assistant treasurer at First Territorial. Still in Redfield. Men who keep ledgers remember numbers. Will he testify? Harp was quiet. He's afraid of Grund, Harlan said. Most people in this valley are afraid of Grund, which is how Grund stays large. I'll go see him. It won't be comfortable. And if Fell doesn't testify, I don't know that we have enough. Harlan nodded and picked up the envelope. How much do I owe you? He asked. Harp waved a hand. I'll tell you after it's over. If we lose, very little. If we win, you'll owe me something that feels fair, and I'll let you decide what that is. That's a strange way to practice law, Harlan said. I'm 70 years old, Harp said. I practice it the way I want now. That night, fire. He smelled it before he heard it. The specific smell of burning wood and lamp oil that his sleeping brain processed before it woke him. And then the orange flicker through the window, and then he was out the door before he was entirely conscious. The barn. Northeast corner of the roof. He was running for the water barrel when he saw her. Anna. Already there. Already carrying a full bucket toward the burning corner. She'd stayed. She'd come back in the night because of the horse's leg. Because of the dropping temperature, because she was the kind of person who followed through on her concerns, and she'd been in the barn when the fire started and she was already working. No words. No coordination discussed. 2 people, 2 buckets, the corner of a burning barn. Not thinking about anything except the next bucket, the next throw, the fire shrinking under the water. He grabbed the rope to go to Saigon's stall. But Ona was already there. Already talking low, halter already on, leading him out through the side door into the corral before Harlan had taken his next breath. Then she was back with another bucket. 20 minutes. 25. The corner caught, held, slowed, died. They stood in the yard in the aftermath. Ash and water on the ground. Sigan circling the corral, Ona's face dark with soot along one cheek, hair loose. Breathing hard in the way of someone who had been working at maximum capacity. Harlan looked at the damaged corner, looked at her. "You stayed," he said. "I was worried about him." She gestured toward the horse. "He's been restless. You stayed," he said again. Not accusation. Not gratitude. Just the fact of it. She looked at him. "I'll go in the morning," she said. "Tonight I'll stay and watch him." He nodded and went back inside. He sat at the kitchen table with his hands on the surface of it and looked at his hands for a while. Steady. They were steady, which surprised him slightly. He thought about the lamp oil smell. He thought about Grun's lawyers, and the 30-day clock, and the clean-cut fence wire, and the city boot print in the soil. And then he stopped thinking about Grund. Because the thing his hands were steady around, that his chest was doing something about, was that she had been there, not by accident, not because the horse was sick, because she had come back in the night, because she had said she might, and she had. He sat there a long time. In the morning she came in from the barn, just as the light was turning the kitchen gold, sat down across from him. He pushed the coffee cup toward her side of the table. She took it. Augustus Fell. He said, "You know that name. My father might. Your father has been watching this valley for decades." He knew everyone who worked at that bank. She was quiet. "I'm not asking you to ask him," Harlan said. "I'm telling you what I need. What happens next is whatever happens. He'll come when he's ready," she said. "He made that decision 3 days ago. He does things in his own order." Harlan looked at her. "You knew he was coming and you didn't say." "He hadn't come yet," he almost laughed. "That's an extremely precise distinction." "Yes," she said, entirely without apology. Then Reed came. 3 riders from the northern approach. Reed in front, 28, mountain lean. A man who had wanted something and not gotten it, and was still working out what to do about that, which made him the most specific kind of dangerous. He stopped outside the fence. "Ona leaves today," Reed said. Matter of fact, like reporting something decided. Harlan said nothing. "This isn't her place. You're not her people." "No," Harlan said, "I'm not." The barn door opened. Ona walked out. She had heard. She moved through the yard at her usual pace and came to stand at the fence 3 feet from Harlan. She looked at Reed. He looked at her. And then she spoke, in her own language. Not fast, not heated. Slow and even and firm in the way a river is firm. Not aggressive. Just completely committed to its direction. Reed's face went through several things. When she stopped, he looked at Harlan. Something in that look, not quite hatred. The recognition of a fact he didn't want to recognize. He turned his horse. The 2 younger men turned with him. They rode north without a parting shot. Just departure. Harlan watched until they were past the ridge. Then he looked at Ona. "What did you say?" he asked. "I told him," she said, "that I am not water. I do not go where I am poured." A pause. "I go where I choose." Harlan was quiet. "Then thank you. Don't thank me. That was for me. Not for you, I know," he said. "I'm thanking you anyway." Something at the corner of her mouth. "That ghost of a thing, you are very difficult," she said. "I've been told," he said. And they stood there in the morning sun, the burn mark on the barn behind them, and the hoofprints of 3 horses, fading in the dry soil in front of them. Reed was gone. But 30 days was not. And $510 was not. One problem at a time. He'd been doing this for 6 years. He went to find Cobb. He had an old banker to visit, and 12 days left to it in. Augustus Fell lived in a house that had shrunk around him. The house itself was probably the same size as always. But Fell had gotten smaller with age, not from illness or weakness, from a kind of settling, like a building that has found its final position in the earth. And the room seemed large around him. The furniture was old and good, and slightly too formal for a man living alone at 70. Harlan knocked. waited. Knocked again. Fell looked at him with the careful eyes of a man who had spent 40 years keeping other people's numbers and had learned that unexpected visitors usually wanted something those numbers could provide. Cross Fell said, "You know who I am. I know who your father was." He stepped back. "Come in." The parlor smelled of old paper and tobacco, and the dry warmth of a fire kept more for company than heat. Fell sat in the chair by the window. Harlan sat across from him. No coffee offered. "This was not that kind of visit." "Grun's paper," Harlan said. He put the envelope on the table between them. Fell looked at it without touching it. "I heard he found it. Do you remember my father's payment?" Silence. The fire. A horse on the street outside. The clock on the mantel that appeared to be in a different time zone. "Mr. Fell," Harlan said, "I'm not here to pressure you. I'm here because I dug a well on that land by hand over 14 days, and I set every fence post on it myself. And I spent 2 years learning how to move water through ground that didn't want to move. And a man with lawyers is using a piece of paper my dead father couldn't answer for to take it." A pause. "If you remember something true, I'm asking you to say it. That's all." Fell looked at the envelope, then at Harlan, then at the fire. "Your father came in on a Thursday," Fell said. "November, 1868. I remember because my son was born that morning, and I'd gone in to work anyway because we were short-staffed. Your father was the third customer of the day." He stopped. "He paid $340 in cash. I counted it myself, wrote the receipt, was going to log it in the ledger at end of day." A pause. "The bank failed on a Tuesday in March of 1869. I never logged it. The receipt, I don't have it. The bank records were seized. But you remember." "I remember because it was the day my son was born, and because your father looked so relieved when I counted that money." Fell looked at the envelope. "He paid it. Will you say it there?" Harlan said. In front of Harp and Grun's lawyers and the district judge, Fell was quiet for a very long time. Then, "My son's name is William. He's grown now. Has children of his own." He looked at Harlan. "I've been afraid of Silas Grund for 11 years. I've watched him take 3 properties in this valley using paper instead of guns." He folded his hands on his knees. "I am 70 years old, Mr. Cross. I am very tired of the weight of what I haven't said." Harlan looked at him. "Thursday, Fed. What time does Harp want me there?" Wednesday came fast. Redfield's courthouse. 1 room. Used 3 days a month when the circuit judge came through. Smelling of sawdust and a room used hard, and left empty between times. Harlan arrived early. Cobb was already in the second row. Harp at the table to the left, arranging papers with the calm of a man who had decided anxiety was a poor use of resources, at the table to the right. Grun's lawyers, 2 of young, Denver suits, the kind of men who had never set a fence post but could discuss the legal implications of one for 45 minutes. Grund himself sat in the gallery. 1 row back, center, visible without being officially present. The judge arrived at 9, 60 years old. The movements of someone who had learned that urgency was a local condition. "Let's proceed," he said. Grun's lawyers went first. They were good. They built the argument cleanly. The debt instrument, the interest, the legal standing of the surviving instrument in the absence of insolvency proceedings. 3 precedents. 22 minutes of smooth, unbroken argument. The lead lawyer placed the note on the judge's bench. The debt is valid and unpaid. The land is the collateral. Harp stood up. He was slower than the young lawyers. He arranged himself differently. Not performing competence, just exercising it. The bank that issued this instrument, Harp said, was the First Territorial Bank of Redfield. It entered insolvency on March 4, 1869. Under territorial law, specifically Section 14 of the Financial Institutions Act of 1867, all outstanding debt instruments held by an insolvent institution are legally suspended pending court certification of each outstanding obligation. He set a paper on the bench beside the note. The certification register from the insolvency proceedings which I have obtained from the Territorial Archive in Santa Fe, shows 37 instruments certified and transferred. This note does not appear in those 37. The arguments went back and forth. Harp against Pemberton, the lead lawyer. The 1867 Act against the argument that the underlying debt survived the bank's failure. Each position stated clearly, countered clearly. Harlan watched the judge's face, not the lawyer's. The judge was the only face that mattered. The judge looked up. "You have a witness, Mr. Harp." "I do." Cobb opened the door. Augustus Fell walked in. He had dressed carefully. The formality of it was visible. A man who had decided something was important enough to dress for. He came to the witness position, stated his name, his position, his years of employment. The judge asked what he remembered about Joseph Cross, and Fell said it clearly, specifically. November, Thursday, $340 in cash. The relief on Joseph Cross's face, the receipt written, the ledger entry never made because of the birth of his son that morning. The bank's collapse 4 months later. "You're saying the debt was paid," the judge said. "I'm saying I counted the money," Fell said. "I wrote the receipt. I know what I did. You have no documentation." The bank took the documentation when it failed. Fell looked at the judge with the steady eyes of a man who has decided to be done being afraid. "I have my memory. I kept ledgers for 40 years. My memory for numbers is not the thing I'd choose to doubt about." Myself, the room was quiet. The judge recessed for 20 minutes. Those 20 minutes were the longest Harlan had spent sitting still in recent memory. Cobb came to sit beside him. Didn't say anything. Just sat there, which was exactly right. Harlan looked at the floor. Thought about the well, 14 days. Hands raw and split. The smell of deep cold water when it finally came. Just there, waiting. You had to go all the way down to find it. The judge came back. "This instrument does not appear in the certification register of First Territorial Bank's insolvency. Under the 1867 Act, an uncertified instrument cannot be enforced following insolvency proceedings." He looked at Pemberton. "Your client's claim is not legally established by this document. Furthermore, the testimony of a credible witness that the underlying debt was discharged prior to insolvency makes enforcement inequitable in addition to procedurally improper." Pemberton was on his feet. "Your Honor." The witness sat in that chair and told me what he remembers. And I have no reason to disbelieve a man who spent 40 years keeping financial records and specifically remembers this transaction because it coincided with his son's birth. He looked at Grun's table. "The claim is dismissed. Done that simply. That cleanly." Cobb put his hand on Harlan's shoulder once, briefly, firmly, then removed it. The economy of a man who understood what gestures cost. Harlan looked at Harp. "Augustus did well," Harp said. "I just showed up with the right piece of paper from Santa Fe. That's $9 for the archive fee, by the way. And whatever you think is fair for the rest." He stood. Cobb was at the door. Outside, in the thin autumn sun. "Your father would have been relieved," Cobb said. Harlan thought about that. About Joseph Cross. About the look on his face, which he hadn't seen but which Fell had described precisely enough that Harlan could almost reconstruct it. When the money was counted and the debt was finished. "He paid it," Harlan said. "That's enough." Cobb nodded once. The nod of a man setting something down. "I'll be at the trading post," Cobb said. "If you need anything, I know where you are," Harlan said. They rode out in different directions, which was how it had always been, and which was fine. 3 days after that, Cobb came by the ranch with supplies Harlan hadn't ordered: flour, salt, coffee, better quality than Harlan usually bought. Reed went back up. Cobb said, looking at the mountains rather than at Harlan. "Heard he asked to be assigned to the northern hunting grounds." Far side of the territory, Harlan said nothing. "That's a hard posting," Cobb said. "Cold. Isolated." He picked up his hat. "Man goes somewhere hard when he needs to put distance between himself and something he wanted. He left. Harlan stood on the porch and thought about that. About wanting something hard enough that the only answer was geography. He understood it. He didn't think less of Reed for it. He thought, some losses take longer than others to become something you can carry without it showing. That was simply true, and it was worth respecting. Then he went back inside. Grund's position had been established clearly enough. Men like Grund didn't learn from single defeats. They recalculated, waited, found other angles. That was tomorrow's problem. Today's problem was solved. The land was his. He found Ona at the ranch when he got back. In the east pasture where the yarrow grew, crouching. Moving through the plants, with the careful attention she brought to everything. Checking each one, selecting, moving on. The late autumn light crossing the pasture at its long, low angle. Her hair loose, the mountains going gray to purple behind her. He stopped at the edge of the pasture, watched her for a moment. Because she was there, and she didn't know he was watching, and he wanted to see what she looked like when no one was watching. Unhurried, fully herself. Moving through this land like she had been moving through it for years. Like it recognized her, maybe it did. Maybe land knew more than people gave it credit for. She looked up, saw him. Well, she said. Dismissed, he said. She stood, brushed her hands, picked up her bag, walked toward him. He met her halfway. They stood in the middle of the east pasture, in the long afternoon light with yarrow around their boots and boots, going purple behind her and the valley going gold behind him. Your father came? Harlan said, I know. He told me things about the last 6 years. Things I didn't know. She was quiet. I thought I built this alone, he said. I was certain of it, and I was wrong, something in her face. Careful. He didn't do it to diminish you, she said. I know. He looked at the pasture. He did it because the land needed someone to do it right, and I happened to be that someone. A pause. He told me that. And what did you do with that? Harlan thought. I sat on my porch for a long time, he said. And I thought about 6 years of believing a story about myself that was true but not complete. And then I thought, maybe that's what most of us do. We tell ourselves we're alone because it's simpler. Because if we're alone, we don't owe anything to the world we're in. We're just in it. He stopped. But we're never just in it. She looked at him for a long moment. No, she said. We're never just in it. The valley around them, the wind. A hawk above, making that high, thin cry. I want you to know, he said, that I'm not telling you this because I want something from it. I'm telling you because it's true, and because you're the person I want to tell true things to. She was quiet. Your father is not a simple man to have a conversation with, he said. No, he is not, but he's fair. He is always fair, she said, and in her voice, something. Pride and difficulty and the specific love of a child for a parent who is both hard and trustworthy. He said I'd need to be consistent, Harlan said. Not protective, consistent. He's right, I know. That I can do. He looked at her. I make no claims about being easy to know. I've been told I am not. You are not, she said. And yet, he said. And yet, she said, which was everything. The whole of it. She reached into her bag. Pulled out a small bundle, leather, tied with the braided cord he'd come to recognize. Held it out. He took it. Heavier than he expected. Open it, she said. He untied the cord. Unwrapped the leather, inside. The small piece of braided rawhide. The first thing she'd left on his fence post, all those weeks ago. The thumbnail-sized knot he'd kept without knowing why. And beside it, a second one. Same pattern. Slightly different tension. You kept the first one, she said. I did. I know. I saw it on your workbench. She looked at the 2 pieces in his palm. The first one I left when I didn't know what I was doing. The second one I made last night. When I knew, he looked at the 2 pieces. Same hands. Same pattern. Different knowledge in them. I still can't read it. He said, no, she said. You can't. Are you going to tell me what it means? She looked at him. It means I tied it, she said. And it means I choose what I tie. He closed his hand around both pieces. Ona, he said, don't make a speech. I wasn't going to make a speech. You were considering it, he had been slightly. One sentence, he said. Say it, she said. Just the sentence. He looked at her. In the last light of the afternoon, the east pasture, the valley that had been his whole world for 6 years and had just gotten, not larger, deeper. I'm glad you came for the horse, he said. She looked at him. And then, fully, for the first time, not the ghost of it, but the actual thing. She smiled. It changed her face entirely. Not into someone different, into herself more completely. Like a room when someone opens the window. Me too, she said. That evening they sat on the porch, both chairs. Occupied for the first time since Harlan had bought them. He'd bought 2 chairs years ago, with the vague optimism of someone who doesn't yet know what they're hoping for. Sigyn was in the corral, moving easily, full stride, head high, the energy of an animal that has been sick and come through it and knows the difference. He'll be ready to go soon, Harlan said. Yes. She was watching too. He'll go back. He belongs up there, she said. A pause. And you, Harlan said. She looked at him. I belong where I choose to be, she said. He looked at the valley. Then where are you choosing? Low? Even? Not urgent. Just asking, meaning it enough to accept any answer. She was quiet for long enough that he made peace with whatever she was going to say. Genuinely, because that was the only way to ask something like that. I have thought about this, she said finally. In every direction, there will be people who object. On both sides, there will be difficult winters, and times when I need to go north for days. When my people need me, I know, and I will go, she said. I will always go when my people need me, I know that. Too, she looked at him. You're not going to argue with any of that, she said. No, why not? He thought about Tokala. About what the man had said on the porch that morning. Because, he said, a woman who doesn't go when her people need her is a woman who has gotten smaller than herself. And I don't want that. He paused. The sentence needed to be right. I want to sit on this porch when you come back. She looked at him for a long time. The kind of looking that counts things. That, she said, is the right answer, I know. He said. She almost laughed. You're very confident. I'm not confident, he said. I'm just very clear on this particular thing. The dark came in fully. Stars appeared, more than seemed possible. More than you remember between times of looking. She reached out, took his hand, not as a declaration, just placed her hand in his the way you set something down where it belongs. He held it. The 2 chairs on the porch. The valley below. The mountains to the north. The 800 acres that were his and had always been. He knew now. Part of something larger than his own effort. Both things true, both. He had built this place, and he had never, not once, not for a single, been as he'd thought. The horse in the corral settled. The cottonwoods along the creek made their sound. Red Hawk Valley, 1874, still, and enough.